Welcome to the first episode of the Queer Geek Cast, webcast edition. We used to be a podcast. We had a few episodes back in 2017. One of our guests today was on that season, but now we're switching formats and going on over to the webcast version. So I'm dubbing this officially season 1.2 because it's kind of the first season, but not really. So I'm Angel. I'm the admin of the parent website of this webcast, The Geekiary. Today's topic is asexual spectrum representation in the media. So I'm going to have my two guests introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Emily Rose, otherwise known as Exercising Emily. I'm formerly a Geekiary writer, and now I just periodically offer queer and ace commentary on my own Twitter account.
My name is Chase. I'm a trans asexual woman, first of all, so there's some context there at least. But really, I'm a connoisseur of queer speculative media in general, be that science fiction, fantasy, whatever. And I hunt it down. So I'm glad to provide input here.
So before we continue with the actual content of the webcast, I do want to have a little disclaimer here. It's going to be a very important disclaimer because I'm sure we're all very opinionated people. So views expressed on the Queer Geek Cast are those of myself as a host and the guests as individuals. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of the entire website, The Geekiary overall. I will probably repeat that multiple times as we get a little feisty later. We are also recorded live, and though we'll try to keep this rated PG, brace yourself for the occasional curse, probably by me, because I have a huge potty mouth. So before we dive into the topic, I kind of just want to lay out some definitions because asexuality is not very well known when it comes to orientations, even within the LGBTQ plus community. So the term asexual, my cat is making noise. Give me a moment to poke him.
Don't poke Bruce.
There are also live animals, basically, in all of our houses, so forgive the occasional interruption. So the term asexual is defined as the lack of sexual attraction to others or low or absent sexual interest in or desire for sexual activity. And of course, this is a broad spectrum. We have gray asexuality, which is basically individuals who identify, individuals who identify with gray asexuality are referred to as gray A or grace or gray ace, and are basically under the ace umbrella. Within the spectrum, there are things like demisexual, semisexual, asexual-ish, lots of different things. What I identify as is demisexual, which is a person who does not experience sexual attraction until they have formed a strong emotional connection with a prospective partner. Now, this is all sexuality side. There's also the romantic side. Aromanticism. Same thing that I just said, but instead of the sexual orientation, it's the romantic orientation. And the two don't always align. I am demisexual, pan-romantic. So that's complicated.
Same, though.
Also same. Asexual. I like to say omniromantic, but there are exceptions to that. And yeah.
Excellent. So the very first thing we're going to talk about is with someone who unfortunately was not able to join the webcast today due to technical difficulties. So we're going to kind of be going off their notes. So just a few days ago, right before we started rebooting this webcast, GLAAD released their study about LGBTQ plus representation in the media. We are at 10.2%, which is a lot more than last year, which I think was at like 8.8 or something like that.
Right.
But on their big list, there was only one asexual character, one. And that character will not be returning to their show next year. It was a character on BoJack Horseman, which none of us have seen. Sorry, there was going to be another person.
But we have notes.
We do. So, Coraline, was going to be the person that was going to be here. And they said that the representation itself is excellent. It's authentic and realistic, how he comes out, navigates relationships, sex-centric culture, and struggles to meet more ace people. Something that they especially liked was in an episode where he faced a situation and expectations that were so cartoonishly over the top, uncomfortably sexual, that it can serve as a metaphor and help allosexual people understand what it's like to be ace and feel inundated with mentions of sex. But that brings us to caveats. Can a show do that and also be a good ace show? So let's see some of the caveats they listed. Reading through their notes. So it's not his story. He fills in the dumb sidekick trope. The context, of course, proves him to be more of a dumb sidekick, but it's still an accurate trope. He doesn't come out as ace until the end of season 3. And that's literally half the show where there's 0 ace content. And not all ace people are sex repulsed. I'm not. That's my aside, not Cortland's aside. I'm not. The main character is a horny, washed-up actor who once tries to have sex with 17-year-old girl as a major plot point in season 2. Well, I don't think I'm going to be watching BoJack Horseman.
Yeah, I think
right. I was reading that like, oh my god.
Thank you for the disclaimer.
Well.
I think we just answered whether or not it's a good ace show. If, I think that we all just ruled this out. So
yeah, I'm not going to be watching it. I don't even know the character's name. The character's not written down here, but it was in the report.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm not interested.
No offense to fans of this show. I don't know with that description if it's something that would really appeal to me. So.
Yeah, and I have a lot of friends who really love this show, but I am sex averse, and I'm even more averse to creepy sex. So, yeah, I don't think I could do that or watch that.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much I think Chris Evans tweets about it a lot, and he seems to like it, but not enough for me to give it a shot.
Right.
So that's the only one, and apparently that character is not going to be on the next season anyway, so we're going to be down to 0%. But there was a character on Riverdale that could have been asexual, but sadly was not.
He is not. So Jughead, the character of Jughead in the Archie comic series, for about 75 years of the comic history, Jughead was unspokenly understood to be asexual and arguably aromantic too. He totally rejected the love triangles that kind of formed the basis of the rest of the comic book. The Archie, Betty, Veronica, all of that. He just had no time for any of it. So historically, the comic books really put Jughead as the dumb sidekick, just like with what they're talking about with BoJack Horseman. So they also, though, made him back at the time a woman hater, and of course we all know that that's not actually asexuality or anything like that. They were doing it for laughs, and it was problematic at the time. It's problematic now, but unfortunately wasn't surprising considering 75 years of history of this comic book. So Jughead, however, it's developed. You have 75 years of history there, a whole bunch of different writers. He's had time. He's become his own title character in the comic books, so we can't just say he's just the dumb sidekick. This is a major character, and he's been revamped. In the recent Archie comics, they cemented it. Jughead is asexual, and he's actually a well-rounded character, which is a big step up from being the dumb sidekick. So I'd say he's actually... I've read the comics, the new Riverdale comic books. He's actually a really good character. He's very interesting. He has interactions with other queer characters in the comic book, including one where he is talking about how just he really doesn't like how stupidly sexual everything else is and all of these love triangles and everything. So taking this character whose role in the comic books is God, I'm so tired of everybody being so overly sexual, into a CW TV show where they're kind of known for being the sexy, edgier versions of everything.
Mhm.
They erased that. They acknowledged that Jughead is an ace character, and they ignored it. They wanted to pair him up with Betty from before mentioned Betty, Veronica, Archie, love triangles and everything. But the actor said that he'd love it if Jughead was asexual. It's just that the show seems to think sex sells, and they've completely wiped that out. In my opinion, it shows why it's important we have a canonically ace character in these kinds of shows, so there's a better understanding of what being ace really means, because the fan reaction was kind of cringeworthy. There were some people who were like, oh, Jughead can't be asexual, Cole Sprouse is too sexy. And I think that something needs to be done, it needs to be acknowledged personally, but I think that that kind of mindset about asexuality really shows why there's a need.
We have another pet guest.
I was
This
getting
is Podrick.
Yeah.
He was demanding attention.
My boy Bruce has finally settled down off camera. Finally. Stop playing with things that are noisy and going to interrupt us. But yeah, he's too attractive to be asexual thing, as though that has anything to do with one's sexuality. Like
Right.
but if someone had said they're too attractive to be gay, I feel like there would have been a little more backlash. But
Right.
for some reason it's not equivalent.
And the sad thing is, in the comic books, he's a great ace character. Archie even comes in and he's like, oh, you don't understand because you're not normal. And Jughead takes a stand for himself as an ace person. It's great in the comic books. But in the TV show, I guess they decided that there was no appeal to an ace character. And I think that's a shame.
Yeah, I definitely think that the assertion that somebody's pretty so they can't be ace is pretty awful. I don't know how else to say that.
It's horribly offensive, but even we're marginalized even within the LGBTQ plus community. I'm not going to compare each individual sexuality one to one, because that we're a community, we're supportive of each other. But I'm saying, if someone's like, oh, they're too attracted to be gay, it would be like, oh, that's homophobic. But when it's you're too attracted to be ace, it's not as much of a backlash.
There's that whole, it's such a waste. And it's your value as a human being has nothing to do with whether you're sexy to other people or not, or going to actually have sex with them. And that's what really bothers me. And if it were just one or two tweets, that would be one thing, but it was a lot of people. So, and unfortunately, it seems to also be the policy of the show.
Yeah. And I feel like not to be too millennial at those damn Gen Zs, but I feel like I have aged out of the CW demographic. So I don't know. Is this type of commentary coming from the specific CW audience, which tends to be younger and maybe doesn't know about, asexuality? But I feel like Gen Z's pretty up on this stuff.
It generally is. But the other thing is, the CW, it does have a variety of shows. We both know that Supernatural, for instance, has an audience that apparently the heads of the CW don't recognize as its audience. Yeah. So there is a lot of a queer audience for these CW shows. So it really it saddens me that they didn't have that kind of representation for their queer fans.
Yeah, that is very depressing. There's some off-air shows. So while these don't necessarily go into the percentage from the GLAAD report, there has been some other asexual representation on shows. Shadowhunters, which was huge. And again, none of us have watched it.
I've been meaning to. I'm sorry.
So terrible. But a character named Rafael Santiago apparently came out as ace in season 2. I don't know much of the context about that, but so I don't know if it's good rep or bad rep. But Shadowhunters itself tends to be pretty LGBTQ plus friendly, so.
Yeah. From what I read when we were getting ready for this podcast, it seems like he turns down one of the female love interests or female lead characters who could have been for him, and explains that he's never been interested in sex even before he became a vampire. So that's good that they didn't associate it as a side effect of something. I have not seen it. I'd love to hear from other people if this is one that we should give it a shot. But I have not watched Shadowhunters yet.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Sorry, I did read the books that were the source of Shadowhunters, and the representation in them was good but different. I'd say less refined. I from what I've heard from other people, because again, haven't watched it. I've heard that the series is roundly better than the books. So
I've heard that too.
Yeah, the tempering influence of which network was this?
Freeform, I think, which has another name. I can't remember. I think it has a different name outside the United States, but I'm blanking.
Yeah, Freeform's usually good about that.
I think the fact that it has such an outspoken queer fan base really is what has been tempting me to come in and watch this, even knowing, unfortunately, the fate of the show itself. So, I don't know. Should I give it a go? I
let us know. Tweet at us, comments on the recording of this. Let us know, because we would love to know. Apparently, there might have been one. It's kind of going to movies now. There might have been one in Terminator. Chase, did you know about that?
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I was reading up on that. So Terminator, and again, this is all secondhand. So grain of salt. But apparently there is an ace character in the new Terminator film who is himself a Terminator, who has been in an asexual romantic relationship for a person for decades, and has I don't know whether they have feelings for them. That's a completely different question, right? Because Terminator, but that makes me want to see the movie much more, because again, if we're getting good representation, for me, I'm always like, it's okay for a villain to be ace as long as being ace is not the reason they're the villain, right? And so I like that, because it gives more nuance to the portrayal.
And what's interesting, I'm noticing, is that a lot of the ace characters are inhuman, and we have a Terminator, we have a vampire. What else was up above? I think
a teenager? I mean...
Well, yeah, that's pretty inhuman.
Oh, wow.
We were going down the list, and Jughead is just a high schooler, so we all lived through it.
But that's a trope when it comes to different kinds of LGBTQ plus representation. I think when it comes to lesbians, it's called the discount lesbian, where they make it not human because somehow that's more palatable. But I don't know. There's not enough ace representation for us to have our own trope names. So even to critique it, I have to borrow from other tropes that are from other sexualities.
And I think later on we're going to touch on that again. So I think when we get down to characters that could have been.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, Game of Thrones is a fun one. And I say fun, and that's a very... If you read my reviews, you know that I have very strong opinions about that final season. But most of what we want to talk about today is not in that final season. So I think maybe we'll be able to get through this without me flipping my computer over and screaming at the sky.
That wouldn't record well, Angel, please.
I'm the one that's hosting this, so let's keep my computer intact.
Yes.
Computers are important and expensive.
Yeah.
Okay. So Game of Thrones actually had an ace character, and a good one. Varys. So Lord Varys, the Spider-Man behind the throne. They could have left it at just he's a eunuch, but we see other eunuchs, Grey Worm, and he has a romantic and a sexual relationship. And we realize that they aren't equating being a eunuch with being asexual. So Varys says pretty clearly that being ace predated him being castrated. sorry, we're now talking about castration on this webcast. But he gets a whole speech about it in a conversation with Oberyn Martell. So let's see.
Oberyn Martell. So not Ace, very not Ace. I'm just getting distracted thinking about Pedro Pascal right now. Let's be real. He's an amazing actor.
Yeah.
He really.
I'm making you a gif. This is she's distracted by Pedro Pascal.
But he's on The Mandalorian. I'm enjoying the hell out of that right now. He's a phenomenal actor, and I felt even though they kind of fell into some bi tropes with him, like has to sleep with everyone he finds attractive. That he didn't play it like poorly. He played it pretty well.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's bisexuality. 2 different kinds of queer in one scene. That's kind of important.
It is. It was a good, if there was a Bechdel test for when characters that are queer talk to each other, and it's interesting. It's good. But the good thing about that was, first of all, he's a great character, and Varys is actually a really good character too. And he goes out of his way to say that it wasn't the castration, because Oberyn is like, well, I can get you some pretty boys. And Varys is like, not interested. And Oberyn's like, wow, never pegged you as straight, basically. And Varys comments that he was never interested in women either. He actually has a really good speech there. He says, let me read this off. I've seen what desire has done to people and what it's done to this country, and I'm very glad to have no part in it. And besides, the absence of desire leaves one free to pursue other things. In his case, that was being the power behind the throne and eventually being set on fire by a dragon, but you can't have everything. He lasted longer than other characters in the show. He was actually a very good, very interesting character. Sometimes he was one of the only ones making sense. So I have a lot of problems with Game of Thrones and in how it ended, but props to them for him, I think.
Yeah.
Seasons 1 through 7 were excellent representation.
Yeah. It's really sad the way he went out too, because he was one of my favorite characters. But he did outlast a lot of people, and a lot of people kicked the bucket, so he almost made it to the end. So I don't know if I would count that as barrier gay, which again, I have to borrow tropes from other sexualities because Ace is so sparse. We don't have our own tropes.
Well, and the other thing is, do they count it when it was on the air? Because they never verbally identified him as asexual. They didn't really have that term. So I'm curious with the percentages, sorry, there was a sound.
It was loud. Yeah, I think we're sorry about that. Continue.
You're good. So the question is, when do they count it? Is it when it's identified in the show? Because it never would have been in Game of Thrones, not by name.
I guess my opinion with that is I think it's more important to identify it by its traits than it is to identify it by the term. Those of us who are in the ace spectrum, we didn't have words to define this past, 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
So I think it's okay that they define it without the words and saying, screw sex, and I'll be able to touch on that again on some topics down the chain here, but I think it's very successful in its representation and excellent in it. I do actually wish that they'd had somebody besides a eunuch be asexual, but but that being said, they did, as you mentioned, they did go to lengths to separate that from his status as a eunuch.
Right.
Because Grey Worm was sexual. I mean, presumed straight, but
boy, was he.
This is a very brief tangent. I promise we'll get back on it. But I watched that scene, the sex scene in that show, at San Diego Comic-Con. We had rented out a restaurant so we could all watch it together because it was airing during San Diego Comic-Con. We didn't realize that there were huge glass windows behind us that everyone can look in and see it until we all realized that a very explicit sex scene was happening on screen. And then we all kind of uncomfortably looked behind us like, oh, shoot, this was bad planning. We're watching Game of Thrones. So anyway, that's how I saw that episode.
Okay.
Okay, anyway, that was a tangent. Sorry. It was quite a moment, though.
It's a good moment. I think that we all learned for years not to watch Game of Thrones in public, but
Yeah, we were just so excited. We're like, we get to watch it together. It coincides with Comic-Con. Yeah, let's rent out a restaurant.
We had a massive bar here in Vegas that did watch parties called the Nerds. So I don't think I actually went to them, but I had many friends who did. No windows though.
I'm surprised we managed to still go to that restaurant every year for our meetups, and they weren't like, oh, those are the people that were like watching like pornography.
It's very popular pornography. Everybody knew Game of Thrones.
Whew, I got us way off course on that one.
Just bit.
It's a fun kind of off course, though.
Are there any other Ace characters on TV that we can think of? I cannot think of any except for headcanons, which we'll get to later. Canonically, I think that's basically it.
I think it might be. I think a lot of the problem is that basically not a lot of people are spending the time to identify their characters as Ace. And so you get to all these headcanons where anybody who's not explicitly having sex and explicitly having sex in the Game of Thrones can be seen that way, but I don't think anybody else has really spent the time to define them.
Gotham.
Ooh.
I only watched the first season.
Oh my gosh. Well, so it was never like great, but it was always just weird enough to be entertaining. But I would say that I would say there's a strong argument again, and this is not on screen, but it's through their actions, that both the characters of the Riddler and Penguin are homoromantic asexual.
I had heard the homo-romantic part, but I thought it was also homosexual, so I didn't know about the asexual part. That's really interesting.
Both of them seem to have rather portrayed interests against sex in my experience throughout the show. And one of the rare cases where it's not via obsession, which is nice.
Yes. That's another terrible trope, but again, has to be borrowed. I think it's called the psycho-lesbian trope, I think. I can't recall, I might be wrong, but where it's like kind of crazily obsessed. But anyway, I don't have that trope pulled up in front of me, so I might have defined it a little incorrectly, but another trope.
So many tropes, so little time.
I know. Chase, I think you have some representation in books, perhaps, yeah?
Yeah, and the first author who I'm going to bring up is actually one who I brought up in the previous podcast as well to talk about queer literature, because they're amazing. And they're on their third series now. And their first series, the Dragon Oak series, which is the one I mentioned in the previous podcast, has an asexual, I think pan-romantic main character who is very well portrayed. And I think Sanfran themselves is genderqueer. Although I don't want to quote on that confidently. But they've got two more series now, both of which at least have non-romantic characters, if not asexual. And they're both developing series, so it's a bit hard to tell initially. But there's a lot to be had there. And then in the more porntacular side of things, Carrie Francis has her Succubus Moon series, which focuses on a succubus. Being a succubus, there's a lot of sex, but the succubus's primary partner, they are both poly, is an asexual woman who is portrayed very, very well. And while I'm not a big fan of The Bourne, I do enjoy basically everything else in that book because of that.
Very cool.
Good to know. And other media, I think there's some in gaming as well, right?
Yeah, well, so I want to start with the big one, because the relatively recent game The Outer Worlds has a character named Parvati, who is actually the first partner that you have the opportunity to get in the game. So the first buddy, but not romantic partner. They're actually they're not a romantic partner to the main character at all, which is kind of cool because usually they do that a lot. And she goes to lengths, if you go through the conversations, to outwardly describe herself as having no interest in sex and having anxiety about that because she's interested in someone else. And she's worried that because she has no interest in sex, that partner will not reciprocate. So you, as the main character, get to help kind of play asexual matchmaker with them, and let them see each other's concerns and bond. And I think that's really, really cool. I've never seen anything like that for an asexual character in games. And then there are two other depictions, which is Maya in Borderlands is very specifically defined as asexual. And again, you have to go through the side missions and stuff to figure this out about her. And then the Riddler in Batman Arkham Knight, who has a monologue about how sex and romance are just a waste of time. But again, that's bordering on the psycho trope right there, I think, because he's sort of obsessed with killing people. So
that's the second depiction of the Riddler as Ace, though, I believe, right? Because he was one of the ones you mentioned in Gotham.
Yeah, that's kind of what got me thinking about Gotham. I was like, And I like that that's a more consistent portrayal for him. And in Gotham, he's a more well-rounded character because they have a whole bunch of seasons to show him off, of course, rather than in a game where we're not learning anything about him but his evil. Yeah, which is okay as long as it's not due to him being Ace.
Which is basically all you got from him from the old 90s movie, is that he's a bad guy. Romance and sex were not part of that film at all. And I don't even know about him in the comics. I have no idea. I've never touched a DC comic. I'm sorry.
And that's the thing is I feel like the only DC comics that I really read regularly are in the Vertigo print, or they are bombshells, because that's just queer all over. But once you get to their main universe, they seem to really consistently fall back on bad tropes when it comes to queer people, which I don't like.
Yeah. I feel like, and I don't know if she's written this, but I feel like if anyone out there was going to write a good Ace character, it would probably be Gail Simone.
Agreed.
She's always really respectful, and on Twitter she is engaged about a lot of the lesser known sexualities and gender representations, and she's always learning and really kind and understanding with fans on Twitter. I don't know if she's ever written one, but if she did, she'd probably get it right.
Yeah, absolutely. Between the characters we've already seen from her and the creativity that she shows with showing queer characters on page, and not making it a very special issue, right? I would love to see her tackle that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Maybe we can tweet at her. She's very responsive.
Make it so.
She follows me on Twitter, so she would probably see it. But anyway,
very cool.
And then outside of that, outside of books and games, and we touched a little on comics. Less about actual media, but the people behind the media, celebrities. There are not a lot. A lot of it that I ran across when researching is speculative. People are like, oh, I believe this celebrity is Ace. I'm not touching that. I'm going to let celebrities speak for themselves. But one celebrity I believe that has confirmed it is Tim Gunn, who I adore from Project Runway. And you know me and my gifts of him saying, make it work. I like that's constant. And I was a big fan of the show in college. So that was pretty cool. And I think there's another one. I'm not too familiar with her, though, or him.
Emily Autumn, has at least been pegged as asexual. And so I'm hoping she said it outwardly and people aren't ascribing that to her. But, and I've met her in person. She's super sweet and super physically affectionate. And that was on the tour for Devil's Carnival. Which she was in. But her primary profession is that she's a musician. She's very popular in the goth industrial scene. And that's kind of her thing. And she's amazing and cute.
This is a hard topic to talk about because I don't want to assign it to anyone. So our list is really short. There's a lot out there that I suspect, but I'm never going to tweet that out loud. I'm never going to mention it here. Everyone should go at their own pace, but I've got ideas.
I feel like when we're ascribing asexuality to a person, be they fictional or non-fictional, we end up ascribing asexuality via the stereotypes of asexuality, which I really don't like.
Yeah.
I think it's important that a person self-defines. Now, of course, in narrative media, we can only go by what they've said. We can't ask Arya Stark, "Hey, you ace?" We need to trust the page or the screen, but that means we can always embellish in our heads with headcanon when they're fictional, because we're not changing, pushing someone's life in a direction.
Absolutely. And that does bring us to our next section about headcanons and celebrity headcanons. Not headcanons about celebrities, but celebrities who have headcanon their own characters. Which is great, in my opinion, because just the fact that celebrities are openly talking about headcanons for their characters is really cool. But it is a double-edged sword, because we get things off screen instead of on screen, which is a whole messy situation.
It is. My problem with that is, unless a show explicitly states that the character is ace on screen, I think, and then backs it up with showing them as ace on the page or on the screen, that they shouldn't get credit, basically, for saying after the fact that a character is queer. Yes, I'm thinking about J.K. Rowling. But by that logic, they could basically come back and say, oh, any character that I made that didn't have sex where you saw it or read it is ace. And that doesn't work. That's not representation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, we got the same thing with Valkyrie, right? Although there's always hints that they may finally go in a queer direction with her on screen, but we didn't hear until, I forgot the actress's name, until she said it after Thor 3.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, she's totally bi, and that doesn't work for me. Especially when they're up playing chemistry between her and essentially a heteronormative role, and it doesn't work.
I think we're going to see more from Valkyrie, but again, that character is bisexual, and so is the actress, and very outspokenly so. So I totally respect that. I hope to see more of that. The problem with ace characters is basically, if they don't say it, all you see is a character that's not having sex. And shockingly, not every character in every series has sex. So, I mean, tell the Game of Thrones people that, because apparently Maisie played Arya Stark and saw Arya as asexual, which is cool, and I love this headcanon from the actress, but the show decided to go another way. So I don't know that really counts.
Well, I mean, at least it doesn't preclude her being like Demi, right? And I mean, lots of ace people have sex. Just so, you're right.
Even aromantic. Yeah, aromantic but sexual, because again, sexuality and romanticism don't always have to align. She does turn him down pretty flatly when it comes to the relationship portion of things. So at the very least, and again, it's not canon. This is all headcanons by both Maisie and by us. But at the very least, her being aromantic is still a possibility, or at least a sex-curious asexual who's not sex-repulsed. So,
which is all great, but they don't they don't address it. Yep. So I don't think it counts.
Yeah, I agree.
That scene was just so uncomfortable for me. I'm gonna be honest.
I mean, like, technically the character and the actress are both adults, but we've seen her since she was a kid, and like, it's your little sibling is having sex situation. Like,
what's funny is
your little murderous sibling is having sex. Yeah.
She was actually very funny about that. She said, "Okay, I get that you're uncomfortable, but my parents and my siblings are watching this." I think she wins.
It wasn't uncomfortable for me, I guess, in the way of the character, because if that's where the character goes, that's where the character goes. It was uncomfortable for me because that was like the sloppiest teen sex I've ever seen.
That's true. I think she just wanted to, she thought she was going to die, so she just did the quick and dirty, like in a barn or the...
I'm sorry, she pulled the Dean Winchester last night on Earth.
Exactly that.
Okay.
But I would be very curious to know from Maisie Williams if Williams, right?
Yeah.
If her own headcanon of Arya as Ace affected her portrayal of the role, and if so, how much? I think that would be a great interview question. But
My God, if I ever get the chance,
yeah,
I will. Who knows? She's a fairly untouchable actress at this point, so we'll see. But I'll keep that in mind if it ever comes up.
Well, as far as other characters who the headcanon is there from the actor, we have The Walking Dead. So Norman Reedus has said that he headcanons Daryl Dixon from The Walking Dead, an incredibly popular character, of course, as being Ace. And he gets fan mail for that. And that's totally valid. But the way that the showrunners talk about asexuality kind of makes me worry about how much they understand about it. Comic creator Robert Kirkman said in an interview on The Talking Dead that they play Daryl Dixon as somewhat asexual on the show. But then he went on and said, I can make it official, Daryl Dixon is straight. So I guess we get a straight announcement there, but contradictory.
Coming out as straight. Oh,
coming out as straight. I know, but he's responding because Frank Darabont is on record saying to Norman Reedus that he saw that the character might be, I apologize to begin with, prison gay. Meaning in his mind that you might catch him, and I'm quoting here, you'll catch him looking at members of the same sex, but if you mention it to him, he'll stab you. So that's a whole problematic mess. And yeah, I don't know how much these showrunners understand queer identity to begin with, given those statements.
The Walking Dead is particularly messy, and we're going to go way into that on a different episode, the quality versus quantity episode. So I'm not going to say too much on that now, but they bury gays every season, which is a big trope issue. Every season, a gay character dies, and they can only have one black man at any time, and then they kill the others. That's a messy show, and I haven't watched since Blynn died. And then I'm like, well, you killed my favorite character, so I'm done.
And I stopped about a season before that, and it was just too depressing because, again, we were watching basically every minority on the show die every year, and that gets old.
So I'm not really surprised. On the same channel, on the Geek Aries channel, we have another podcast called The Bitching Dead, which is all every week. Fareed, Tara, and Becca get together and complain about The Walking Dead. So this is a small snippet of anger towards The Walking Dead. If you want to hear an hour plus every week of complaining about The Walking Dead, check out that webcast.
The big problem I have with this whole thing, I think, is, first of all, we can't trust them to do it well if they do it. Second of all, they keep teasing relationships with Daryl because he's a very popular character. There are some popular ships with him. And they're kind of hedging their bets right now. And they're doing it by saying, oh, it's our grim, dark world. Nobody's really interested in sex except for the ones that we explicitly want to make have sex. But it's not surprising that this character is more interested in, say, surviving. So
a whole plot point was a baby being born. People are having sex. Come on. I'm sorry, that's a bad excuse.
Yeah, I have a problem with them saying, well, these people have a temporary lack of interest in sex as even being in the same universe, right? Because it's not. It's a quality of character, in addition to being a sexuality, you know what I mean.
Yeah, it's not really a sexuality. It's based on conditions, which is not sexuality. Sexuality is a part of you. It can change. You can discover new things about yourself, or your interests can shift. But it's not going to shift just because you don't have the opportunity to have sex, or the world around you is really violent, so you're distracted. Your sexuality is still there.
Yeah, and they still have the opportunity to make Daryl Ace. They do. They haven't taken that off the table yet, but it's going to become whether or not they take the time to explicitly define him as such in the show, and if they stick it through to the end.
We shall see. Well, I won't see. I quit. But
We'll read about it
Yeah, I'll
online.
read about it. Yeah.
Oh, speaking of headcanons, let's talk about our headcanons, which are not at all canon at all, so they don't get any credit, but since there's so little out there that's confirmed, sometimes we do have to play around with it to get, our satisfaction in regards to having a character we can relate to. I want to start with character Ritsuka on the anime Given. So that is a BL anime, boys love shonenai, or yaoi, however you want to determine it. Like that, those words define lots of different things. But basically, it's an anime with the two main characters falling in love, both men. Ritsuka doesn't seem to have considered his sexuality very much until suddenly he falls in love with Mafuyu. So in my head, I canon him as demisexual, which again I defined earlier. It's like you don't have a sexual interest until you get very emotionally connected with someone. In this case, he got connected with Mafuyu, and all of a sudden, oh, I'm interested in men, or at least I'm interested in this one man, So that's my headcanon with that. And I know you watched that, Emily.
I do, and everybody should watch that. It's a great show. It's got good music. It's got great characters. It's very, very queer and explicitly so without becoming porn or anything. So don't feel like that's what it is. I think, I don't know. There's a scene in the anime where he's sitting down with all of the different versions of himself.
The Ritsuka assembly, yeah.
Yes, they're throwing a party of just different versions of him, and they're wishing goodbye to the one that's called the Virgin him. So I don't know as much. He might be demi. That would be great, and I'd love that. And I can certainly see where we can get that. I'm not seeing where he was sex obsessed or anything beforehand. I just don't know as much. Of course, we never know.
Yeah,
because
it's never said it. So I'm just writing fan fiction about it.
I love it. I'll read all of it.
And then there's Sherlock, and now's a good time to repeat the disclaimer. The views on this program are mine and mine alone, and do not necessarily represent the geek area overall. So Sherlock went to shit. Oh, and I also got profanity in here. Great. See, look.
There you go.
Everything I mentioned at the beginning of the episode is coming into play right now.
It doesn't count if the profanity is about Moffat, okay? It doesn't count.
The show did go to shit, though. But before that, the headcanon of Ace Sherlock was extremely important to me, and it's actually how I discovered that asexuality was a term and was something that I related to. Because there was this really great series of fan fiction back on LiveJournal that should tell you how old this was, all about homo-romantic asexual Sherlock and bi-romantic heterosexual John. So they weren't interested in each other sexually, but they fell in love, and it was really interesting fanfic, and made me also taught me that romantic and sexual orientations are not necessarily the same. So despite all the crap that show through, at least the fanfic taught me a lot, and I was glad it existed, and I'm glad I had that headcanon. So.
But speaking of showrunners who know nothing about queer identity, we have Moffat. And he said that Sherlock being ace would be boring, basically.
Moffat.
Yeah. So I'm trying not to cuss, so I'm just going to leave it at that for Moff.
Yeah. I think at the time the show was airing, I was still trying not to cause too much controversy on the Geek area, so my articles were not super Moff attack dog style. Since then, I've stopped caring about that.
Back in the day when
I was trying to be nice back in the day and not so controversial, and now I'm just screw it.
Controversy on the geekery. We've never seen that before.
Right? Oh, Lord. Moving away from controversy, another headcanon I have Yuri from Yuri on Ice, which apparently is problematic, or so I was told on Twitter, but it's still my headcanon. Apparently, and this is completely a valid point of view, but it's not necessarily one I agree with, but specifically headcanoning Asian men apparently as asexual can be a problem because they're seen as, I don't know how to phrase this.
Because of stereotyping.
Yeah, stereotypes, basically.
Yeah.
It's essentially the cold fish stereotype.
Yeah. So that was a hard one.
Fish off of Yuri or anything like that.
Yeah.
I have also read
Me
him
neither.
I've also read him as Demi. He's a very emotional, very well-rounded, excellent character who, loves the hell out of Victor. So,
So that's my headcanon, and the pushback on it's valid, but I want representation, and I see that in him. So
and you see something that you relate to in him, and that's really how we end up with these headcanons. Oftentimes, is we are seeing things that we relate to personally, and then we are kind of sharing our experience with these characters in our own heads. So
yeah. And I have another one where I'm going to repeat the disclaimer. The views expressed on this webcast are those of us individuals and doesn't necessarily reflect the geek theory overall.
I know where this one is going, don't I?
Castiel.
Cass.
In fact, that I haven't watched that show since about season 10, and we're now on season 15, the final season. So it's been 5 years. I don't know what's happened to him the past 5 years. Pretty much my only tie to the show is I still play Gish, which is the scavenger hunt by the actor who plays Castiel. But for many years, the Ace or Demi headcanon was really important to me. But since that show left such a bitter taste in my mouth, I almost don't want to revisit it and think about why I headcanoned it. However, Emily, I think you might have some opinions.
I do. I personally headcanoned Cass as demisexual, and for the longest time, for years, I did. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of consistency writer to writer on characterization in Supernatural, insert disclaimer, etc. So certain writers who shall remain nameless, but you all know who they are.
The views expressed on this program are
certain writers of Supernatural are less consistent than other writers about characterization. And as soon as they saw Castiel become human, they saw this as an opportunity to make him a sexual character. And so he falls into bed with April, who then kills him. And it's all under false pretenses anyway. So we have a whole consent issue to begin with. And as soon as he's human, he's fascinated by these bouncing boobs going past him on random women. So it really, unfortunately, established asexuality as something otherworldly or something non-human. And as soon as he became human, they tried to shift him into a sexual character. And that may just have been those specific writers, but unfortunately that is what we are left with as the canon of the show, which really bothers me a lot. I really loved Castiel, and that headcanon meant a lot to me too.
And when I was watching the show, that was another learning experience for me about asexuality. I got a little bit of pushback on me as well because I was headcanoning a non-human character as Ace, which is also a problem. I can't remember the trope name for that now, but it's another... Oh, I think that's also discount lesbian. Anyway, I don't have the tropes written down, but basically we're a non-human. The excuse for their sexuality is, oh, they're not human, so we can make them not heterosexual. So there is a problem, but still important to me.
There's a problem with it because what they did was cement that. And Castiel is and remains an incredibly human character, whether or not he's an angel. So the fact that they decided to make this an inhuman quality is where the kind of more problematic aspects come into of that headcanon. So.
Yeah.
So I feel like this can segue into another current live narrative show, which is The Good Place. Janet is portrayed very consistently as being both aromantic and asexual, but still being able to have a boyfriend while being a not girlfriend. All right.
Is Janet the like AI type character?
Yes, she is.
Okay. Sorry, I haven't watched the show, but I know by proxy.
It's
right.
very, very good. It's probably the best comedy in decades.
The episodes I've seen are very funny, but yeah, I could see what you're saying. Where is that an aspect of her character or an aspect of how they're writing her? So.
And from the portrayal, and this is probably one of the rare problematic things that is not addressed as such on Good Place, it's because she's the AI, because she's not human at all. She just portrays a human.
So it's like the opposite of a sex bot. It's like
exactly
the asexual bot. I don't know. Oh dear! Now we've got
she
more
also
tropes.
Specifically says she's not a robot many times too.
Yeah, I haven't. That's good, actually.
Yeah.
I need to watch that. Everyone says it's a great show, but yeah.
I do recommend watching it in order. It's not episodic at all. It does follow a clear narrative structure throughout the entire show so far.
I will get on that. Also, I just love Kirsten Bell, so...
Yes.
Ted Danson is just amazing on it. I haven't really been a fan of his previous comedy. He's just surpassed himself in every way on this, and we're in the final season of it now. We've got like half a season to go, and it's amazing. It's such a well-written, good, wholesome, despite being completely twisted show.
That'll be on my list once I'm done marathoning Clone Wars, because I'm trying to get Clone Wars done before Star Wars comes out next month. So right after I'm done with that, I'm going to go into The Good Place. I think Chase, you might also have some possibly anime-related headcanons.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of this show, but I have watched it all because I get bored a lot. Zaraki Kenpachi from Bleach is specifically portrayed as sex-averse, or at least sex-apathetic. He has a partner character who I've never seen speculated about it, but that would be interesting too. They do kind of hint at a lot of character sexuality in Bleach that they don't really touch on very well, both in the manga and the anime. Mostly because they have a lot of filler and they lose track of their characters, both in the manga and the anime. Kino and Kino's journey is she is overtly asexual. She all she cares about is traveling and seeing the world, and they've had characters approach her, and she just blows them off, which is kind of nice. But I do want to postface this with saying it's very hard, as in Yaoi BL and in Yuri GL, to gauge a character's sexuality even when they're actively engaged in it, because they have a lot of one-dimensional characters, and when you do that, it becomes very hard to extrapolate. Those of us who are aces often get pegged as being tsundere in real life because, again, the whole cold fish thing, when in fact it's just that people aren't approaching us with the kind of affection that we enjoy. So I think that almost all anime portrayal of asexuality is problematic. Almost all comic portrayal of asexuality is problematic, because they insist on replacing sex with something.
Yeah, I think I've heard of Kino's journey. I think one of my other guests for another episode, we're going to do an episode specifically about anime. She mentioned that in one of our panels at QuaiCon last year, but I haven't personally read it, but she likes it, so
it's a really calming show. Like it's I guess it's different that it doesn't rely on spectacle as often as some other things I've watched, and that's kind of nice. I picked it up, the first one I picked up over 2 decades ago, And then there's now a second series for it, and which just follows the same thing. It is pretty episodic, so again, we have simpler characters, and because of that, it can only ever be fanon, I think. Plus, the character's a 15-year-old girl. But that doesn't stop a lot of anime.
It's anime, yeah.
Happens. Now, there's another show which is more recent and has both animated and live action forms, both on Netflix, which is Kakegurui, which I would argue that most of the characters are just portrayed as asexual in that show because they replace sex with gambling. And their reactions to the gambling are overtly sexual. But there's sex is just never approached in the show that I've seen.
Sexualizing gambling is an interesting choice. I'm just...
I'm roulette sexual.
That's basically what they do, though. And these characters are like getting off on losing. Which is a very different portrayal, but they are definitely not portrayed as balanced characters who have a sense of the consequences of their actions. So I don't think that's a positive portrayal in as much as it's possibly an amusing one. Now, the last one I wanted to touch on from my fanon is I definitely think that Batman is aromantic. Every time he's portrayed in a role of romance in anything I've ever seen him in, except for the Tim Burton one, it's performative, and I really like that because for people, I know for me, every time I've tried to participate in sexual activity, it's been performative. It may as well be sit-ups, right? It's nothing positive. It's just there as a means to an end, rather than being the end for the means.
Yeah, same way with me. So I could definitely see that headcanon as well. Side note, the cat that was being very loud and distracting us earlier is named Bruce Wayne. So I enjoy that one. I know, my Bruce. And so because of that, I will say I like this headcanon of Ace, or Arrow, at least Arrow Batman. And I think I will adopt it as my own.
I'm down for this.
So we've been going for about an hour, but does anyone have anything else that we haven't mentioned to bring up before we start wrapping it up?
I don't think so. I think for the most part, my big thing here is that there needs to be more just clearly stated asexuality. I think that our headcanons are great and they're valid, but they don't really help other people, especially people who are questioning, because we're all pretty comfortable in ourselves and our sexuality, or at least, we've come to terms with it. But people who are questioning or looking for these answers, and they're not seeing themselves represented in media, they're not seeing this kind of stuff, are trying to fit these other molds. And I think that really media's purpose and role in culture is very important. And yeah, these are fictional characters, but we all relate to them in some way, and they help us understand ourselves better. And I think that we need more ace representation in order to do that.
I agree.
Well said.
Else? Perfect. All right. Well, I think that's wrapping it up for the show. So thank you to the both of you, and thank you to everyone who's tuning in to this. It's going to be uploaded to YouTube. So subscribe to YouTube so you can see more of this season 1.2. So thank you for tuning into the Queer Geek Cast. We're run off of donations by viewers like you. So please subscribe, follow us, like us on all social media. You can find us as the Geekiary pretty much everywhere: Twitter, Facebook, Pinterest, Instagram, YouTube, and thegeekiary.com. And also sign up for our Patreon so that you can help support the parent website. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.